Welcome to Time Team Tea Time Chats. Lawrence and Derek, old friends of mine from the Bournemouth area. We've got you on here. I know you run something called Career in Ruins, and we will get to that. But the first burning question I have that I need an answer to is, what the hell is so important about Poole Harbour? What is all this excitement about it, for God's sake? Isn't it somewhere where lots of rich people live on sandy something or other? Why are archaeologists obsessed by it? Derek?
Oh, see, I would say it's one of the most important sites, archaeologically speaking, in Northwest Europe. It spans multiple time periods. It's a place of connectivity. It's a place of industry. It's a place of trade, and it's one of those rare places where you get a direct glimpse of some of the invisible people in the past, those people that don't get studied all too often, particularly mariners. We know things move, we know things are traded across the channel, but we don't necessarily see the evidence of that. But Poole gives us that insight into a group of people that must have existed, but we don't know very much about.
Derek and Lawrence, rather.
No, bearded archaeologist number two. I mean, what I find fascinating about Poole Harbour is the rate at which it changes, and that I think Derek touched on it there, but that constant movement of lands and whatnot. And I know you've been looking at Green Island this week, and you touch on that a lot in that area. And we were out on our paddle boards going around the island only a couple of weeks ago, actually, and we saw that firsthand, the rate at which erosion takes place, and even modern day interaction with that changing landscape is fascinating. Over thousands of years, it's even more interesting.
I came to a lot of this stuff via Barry Cunliffe's book, Facing the Ocean. And it seemed to me that in that, he made the very kind of exciting proposition that those early connections between us and the continent would probably have come across that narrow gap of water between what was Gaul and Iron Age Britain. And if you wanted an entrepot, then the place you would probably head for is that it's one of the deepest freshwater harbours in the world, something like that. But, you know, it's very frustrating for me, you know, if I'm making a film about it, I end up looking at large amounts of mud. I've never seen so much. I think Eileen Wilkes politely called it colluvium. And is that a polite word for mud? And there was acres of gallons of this stuff and little bits of black stuff coming out of it. And it's a tough sell in a way. I mean, give me a boat, give me imported goods. I mean, where's the bling end of Poole Harbour research? What's turned up that would get people excited?
See, there's definitely some bling, and there is some good stuff, but I think that the bit that makes Poole so special is the insight into the liminal end of people, the little man, if you will, the little people on the edge of society, those people who maybe aren't rich, maybe aren't chieftains, they're not central places, they're places between places, and they're the people that we just don't see very often. But that said, you've got sites like Bulbury Woods, which is a hill fort just off of Poole Harbour, and they excavated a large anchor there, so possibly producing anchors for Poole Harbour. It's connected via a river network, so it's part of the hinterland. But there's some amazing sites in and around the area, but it's that kind of marginal liminal land, poor agricultural land, that I think gives it its special character.
I rather wanted, Lawrence, to have the Poole Harbour equivalent of the Ula Nurum. What's the wreck in Greece where they found a whole bunch of amphora, everything they traded?
Yeah.
What is
I
that?
know when you mean. Yeah.
There's the Ankythera. Ankythera wreck is one.
There's the Antikythera, and there's the Ullabaroon wreck in the Eastern Med.
That's the one. So where's the Poole Harbour boat with all the stuff in it?
Oh, that's the.
We had a logboat. We had a logboat.
What you need to do, Tim, is head down to the fantastic Poole Museum.
Yes.
And see the brilliant display. And this thing is spectacular. and massively over engineered. Recent reconstructions that have tried to mimic this thing, just I wonder how it's floated. So whether it was ceremonial or whatnot, we're not
well,
sure.
It seems like it didn't float because it did sink to the bottom at some point in its life.
I have to say, for anybody who's not seen it, we'll try and get a still up of this thing. It is pretty much about a third or 2/3 of a very dodgy looking log boat that I'm sure I could get quite imaginative about, but I'm not sure it's the Ankythera wreck, up to its neck in mud, of course,
it's
as
all
well.
relative.
It's already. And so the next question I would have after all these very abrupt questions is, why? Why are they coming across? What is the point? What are they trading? What has Poole and Dorset got that it can flog to Gaulish merchants? I mean, I come from Cornwall, and we've got tin, we've got Gabbroic pottery, we've got gold, we've got all sorts of stuff. What are the guys trading in to make the trip across the channel and meet up with a bunch of Iron Age Brits?
There's something that pops up, I think, in the episode on Green Island, the type of ceramic in the area, black burnished ware. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that people were crossing the channel for a specific type of pot, but you see black burnished ware produced by the harbour. You also see loads of salt being produced, and I suspect there's a lot of curing of meats, of pickling, of exporting foodstuffs potentially back and forth from the channel. And we know when the Romans came, they loved black burnished ware, and I suspect they loved it because it carried foodstuffs, it carried salt, it carried things that people need to survive. So maybe not as headline breaking as tin and copper and bronze, but I think potentially more important to sustaining large populations, sustaining armies, for example, and sort of complex towns, cities, etc.
And you mentioned towns and cities. Lawrence, you're working with the National Park. You're the National Park archaeologist. You better explain who you are, just in case people don't know.
Right. So I'm the archaeologist for the New Forest National Park Authority, and it's varied between planning work and general research and working with community groups. But I think one thing that's interesting to be aware of is that heathland that the New Forest is so famous for. We've got one of the largest lowland heathlands in Europe, but that once connected all the way through to Arn, which is right next to Brownsea Island. And what we think of the New Forest today, I mean, more recently, it's been changed, but the thought is it's devoid of archaeology, but actually it's not. And it's a place, it's a resource through thousands of years, whether it's use of the clays, or whether it's use of ironstone, whether it's use of the timber and charcoal production. And it's harks back to what Derek was talking about previously, but it's a brilliant place for just your standard everyday necessities. And I suspect we might be seeing that in Poole as well.
And Derek mentioned cities and things like that. I mean, if all this wonderful trade was coming in and they were making all the money from flogging pottery and various other things to these people coming in, what are the big sites in the hinterland around Dorset and Poole? What are the places where you can see, if you like, the conspicuous display of Iron Age wealth based on flogging pottery, if Derek's right?
I mean, there are tons of fantastic little forts in the area. If we start with Maiden Castle, Hamden Hill, but there are also loads of fantastic little Iron Age enclosures. And Derek and I were actually out at Woolsbarrow Hill Forts on Forestry England land, and recently saw a terrible heathland fire run across it. And we've been looking at doing some 3D recording of that site. Now the gorse and bracken and heather have all been removed. That habitat's gone. Let's see if we can get some beneficial outputs out of it. And there's a brilliant book by Miles Russell which looks at lots of all these little small Iron Age enclosures and hill forts, and the area is absolutely jam-packed with them.
We had a chat with Miles last week about his interest in the area and what he's doing. Derek, I kind of get an idea about what Lawrence is doing. What do you do, and are you going off to Greece this year, are my two key questions.
So I'm a lecturer in archaeology at Bournemouth University, and I've got two strands of research at the moment, one of which is Poole Harbour and Dorset, so that helps, and also looking at urbanisation in Greece. And we are hoping to go out this year. Lawrence and I are both, we currently have flights booked to travel out in September, all things being well, but there's still a long time between now and then. But we're actually going to excavate our site in Greece for the first time. So we've done geophysics. We've basically thrown a time team method at it over the space of 4 years of doing geophysics, different types of survey, and finally we get to dig a hole in it in the year that we might not be able to go. It's frustrating.
And apart from the wonderful country, the good wines, the beaches, the sand, and the incredible weather, exactly what is the attraction of this particular Greek site?
So it's a Hellenistic city site, and it's in the middle of Thessaly, which is an area that hasn't seen a huge amount of archaeological research. And actually our site is a real big chunk inland, so barely any Western archaeologists or non-Greek archaeologists have really showed much of an interest. You can see the clusters of where British archaeologists have gone to look in Greece, and it all tends to be around beautiful islands and coastlines, whereas inland there's an awful lot less work. So it's the kind of the virgin territory almost that drew us to it in the first place, and being able to investigate something with a suite of scientific techniques in a way that hasn't been done in such a grand scale, in such a combination really in that particular area before. So it was a chance to try something new and interesting, but also try and understand this bizarre scale of urbanism that seemed to come down with Alexander. Basically invaded and said, I'm going to build some cities, and that's how I'm going to make my mark on the landscape. And it's really easy to kind of say that and write that in a book. Alexander came and he built lots of cities, but what's the reality of that on the people living there? I mean, do you see abandoned villages? Do you see populations moving? Who's living in the cities? Who's building them? Where are these people that suddenly go from being arable farmers or pastoral farmers suddenly to urban dwellers? It's a bizarre scenario, and it's one I'm quite intrigued to try and unpick archaeologically.
And you've been welcomed by the local Greek archaeologists, some of whom it's been a great pleasure to meet in connection with Ithaca, and that is a very important part of working in Greece, isn't it? That sense that the local people, the local archaeologists are behind what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, we are absolutely blessed with local collaborators who, I mean, it's their area, it's their region, it's their archaeology. And I say, oh, no one's really looked at it, but of course the Greeks have been working there for years and they know it inside and out. So to be welcomed in as partners, not as kind of oppressors coming in and stealing archaeology, we're there to work alongside our Greek colleagues, and we've been very welcomed, and we've had a really good working relationship with them.
And have you, it's better to do a few things. We better do a few dates first of all. Approximately, this is post-Mycenaean. This is quite late classical Greek.
Yeah, so it's sort of the dawn of classical. So we're around 500 BC, which is I quite like, because it's a similar period to my interest in the UK, albeit culturally very different, sort of contemporary time-wise with the Middle Iron Age here. So when the hill forts are being built, when Poole Harbour's at its peak, we've got cities in Greece and Alexander running around building columns everywhere.
And so what have you done technically speaking? You've done a geophysics survey of the site, aerial drone footage. What have you sort of done in the previous years that enable you to get to an excavation now?
So the first thing we did in terms of geophysics was magnetometry, and we did a large survey over the site. Lawrence was a part of that. He walked many grids for me. It was an amazing survey, and it's one of the best it's certainly the best I've done and been a part of, but it's one of the best I've ever seen. The intricacy is amazing. But we've used some other techniques as well. There's a few not standing earthworks, we're in Greece, standing structural works, architectural works. So we've had a extensive GPS survey of that, and drone work looking at topography. And in and amongst all of that, we've trialed other techniques alongside it. We did some radar, some GPR work in the first few seasons, which proved really fruitful. It showed very different things to the magnetometry, so you could see streets and the grid layout in the mag data, but the radar was showing us individual walls and internal structures. It was really, really special to see.
And Lawrence, you were part of that Geophysics Survey team. What sort of area were you trying to cover? And once you covered it, did you look at it and think, my God, there's a site I'd like to dig? How excited did you get when you saw the results?
It was one of the most rewarding surveys I've ever done, I've got to be honest. One of the quirks of it was that the magnetometry almost seemed flipped, because it's a very magnetic area and the walls are created from marble. The walls show up in opposite way to perhaps how you might see a burnt cog wall in Britain, for example, or something like that. So that was a nice touch as the results came in. But I mean, we had a team of 3, so myself, JC Hagan and Asta. And
Don't forget Hayden.
Pardon?
Don't forget Hayden.
I'll get to put out the GPR, but we were getting, I think each we were getting about 30 grids done a day. And that's in pretty hot conditions with lots of thistles and local rabid dogs and all those. But and so every day we'd get huge chunks of data, and these grids are 20 meters by 20 meters. But it was just every day we were piecing a new part of the city together. Oh, that road's carried on a bit further. Oh, there's a new structure. Oh, that structure is actually off grid. Oh, actually, is that a later wall that's running through there? Oh, we can see some defensive towers.
So you'd done a lot of it. What began to stand out to you as a target? I'm thinking, if I'm writing the TV show of this, I think I'm possibly going to need a temple, a burial site, a marketplace, an agora. What caught your eye in that great, or was it just like a huge housing estate?
I think we've got to be a little bit careful here, because the publication's coming out in October, so we can't do too many spoilers.
Oh.
But they'll have my guts for garters. But
right.
I don't know. I'm not sure about Lawrence, but for me, there's a whopping great avenue running right down the middle of the site, and I'd love to see if you can see the kind of the traces of activity on it. I'm kind of thinking Pompeii and the ruts on the streets, and I'd love to see that. When we dug down at Poole Harbour, we found some cart tracks in the mud about 1.5 meters down, and just seeing that little human impact on something is for me, I find that really special. So being able to excavate the avenue or one of the side streets and seeing if you can see that repeated use, to just get a sense of, was this site built and then used, or was it just built and then did it fall into disrepair? So that would be my area. As
you're describing it, I'm thinking of what the Victor drawing would look like. You know,
that's something I'd like to see.
Yeah, the busy street full of the Greeks coming and going, and I suppose by the time of Alexander, you were talking about extraordinary links across the Greek world with people from Asia, from all over the place, sort of. And is this near Thessalonica universities up there? It's in that area, or?
No, we're slap bang in the middle of the Thessalian plain. So if you find Volos on the coast, yeah, and then come in a little way, you'll find us. So we're near to Karditsa, which is one of the inland towns.
And the nearest beach?
That would be near to Volos. Glifa's very nice. So it's about a 2-hour drive away. It's good for a weekend.
I bet at the end of the day, that beach would have been absolute. I mean, I've happily holidayed in Greece a few times, and it gets fairly warm and fairly dusty. I suppose it's ironic when you're talking about it. Last year I went to Mycenae and went in that amazing, the treasury of Atreus, the huge beehive tomb. And it was very hot and very dusty, and nothing could be a greater contrast with Poole Harbour and the nice muddy colluvium. So it's quite 2 different places. But you're now going to be excavating, and I understand you've got to keep it, quiet because of all this report business, and we shall look forward to seeing that when it comes out. But you're supposed to be digging this year. Who's doing the digging? How did you put the team together?
It's a mix of universities. So we've been working with the University of Gothenburg. We've got some colleagues, commercial archaeologists from Sweden as well, and they're taking the lead on the excavation. So my colleague Johan Glange will be running it alongside the Greek effort. And we're only going small this year, just a few keyhole trenches, just to test the waters, get a sense of the site, and just see how we all work as a team in that context. Because in the past few seasons we've all had our little components where we go off and do our jobs, but focusing us in all together on an excavation, it's a very different beast. It'll be a very different experience, I suspect.
And this is funded by the universities, is it, and by European money, or how do you manage to get something like this going?
What we have is a director who is a magician with funding. He says he's writing a grant. He tells us, he says, what do we want to put in it? We give him some feedback, and then all of a sudden he's applied for 10. I can't claim to know where it comes from. I can't.
It's a Bournemouth person or a Greek person?
No. This is my colleague Robin Runland, who's the project director. He was based in Gothenburg when we started the project. He's now based in Athens permanently, but he's a Swedish chap.
He sounds absolutely great. Derek, I'm going to bring anything you want. Oh, nice Puscat. I bring anything you want from a time team package. I can get anything you want. It's a fantasy site, so we might as well go for it. What is it that we could possibly help you with or bring out? What would be the most useful thing if we could, bring something out?
I mean, how fantasy are we going here? Because there's something I've always wanted to do with that site, but it's
absolutely. Well, you tell me what it is, and I'll see what I can summon up.
So there are some magnificent fortifications on the hill. They go right up to the top, and you can see them on Google Earth. They're incredible. And then there's a mess of rubble on the top of the hill. But it would be impossible to do any work up there because it's a 40-minute hike to the top up a near vertical cliff face, basically. So we'd need a helicopter or some zip lines to just function up there, really, because it's
extreme archaeology we did when Alice Roberts and one or two others were involved in it, and we made a habit of slinging them up and down dangerous castles on ropes. We had a wonderful rope team, which is the answer. So I don't think that would be too much of a problem.
Excellent.
And so when you get up there, it's just a pile of rubble. How would you sort out the structures? You can't do radar or something.
No, we've tried to do some geophysics up there, and it was a mission getting the kit up to the top. Yeah. That was a challenge in itself. Yeah. But there are some hints of edges. You can just see them creeping out, but to start moving the boulders to get to them would be a real mission. So we need some pulleys and winches. Maybe just 2 or 3 helicopters would do the job.
We should say that tortoises managed to make it to the top of this hill absolutely fine.
Yeah, so routinely.
It's near on our fitness than
Lawrence, you were talking about that site you were looking at. I know you a year ago we were talking about a sort of big dig around the national park where you were involving villages and things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and then perhaps move on to, if we gave you time team for a while, where would you take them and what would you want us to do? Uh-oh. We've had a Zoom freeze.
That's strange. It's normally me that this happens to.
Yeah, you're back. Yeah.
I'll start again.
Start again.
So the first project you mentioned there was an initiative my colleague ran, a community archaeologist called Dig Burley, and this very much looked to follow in the footsteps of something we'd seen you produce, actually, Tim. So Dig Village. And I know Krenz has done bits and bobs like this, but the idea of bringing a community together to look at test pits, metre square test pits in their back garden. And Burley is a fairly central village in the New Forest National Park in the south of England. And we had 48 test pits, I believe, overall, and had a fantastic variety of finds that informed people's back gardens, some just at the bottom of the hill forts where you're finding possible Iron Age ceramics attached to that, and beautiful flint arrowhead, Mesolithic blades. But it just brought the community together really nicely, and we actually got the final report coming together in the next few months. So hopefully that will be available on our website, New Forest Knowledge. And I'd recommend everyone check that out. In terms of a specific project, it's hard not to focus on the New Forest. I do have a site that we've been working on. There's an Iron Age site, or what's classed as an Iron Age hill fort, on the Monuments at Risk Register, and I've been working with Forestry England and other bodies to get this off the Monuments at Risk Register. And more recently, we just put a small trench over this perfectly circular enclosure, no more than 100 metres in diameter, slightly outturned entrance. And we put a trench across the rampart and the ditch. At the very bottom basal level of this ditch, we've got a Neolithic date, and this is classed as an Iron Age hill fort. Now, that's not to say it's definitely a Neolithic monument, but certainly prehistoric dates from monuments in the New Forest, at least, are quite scarce and hard to come by. And I just feel there's a lot more to be learned about this site. It's very neat, it's perfectly well preserved, and it will be fascinating to put a couple more trenches, get really nailed down the date of that site, and also look at the interior, see what's going on, because it feels a bit Bronze Age. It's obviously got this much earlier date, but it's been classed as Iron Age. It'd be great to get to the bottom of that question.
So you've got a sort of development that possibly begins in the Neolithic through the Bronze Age. Do you know when the site went out of use? Did it have an Iron Age end to it, or?
It does feel like that. So the excavations of the pit itself has got a number of phases, and we got 2 or 3 dates, and the second recut of the ditch has an Iron Age date attached to it. But there's what's lovely about it. So in the New Forest, over the last 10 years, we've had a huge LiDAR project run across the whole national park, where we've been identifying new features or forgotten archaeological sites. A hugely powerful project and resource. But what this has pulled up as well as a secondary bank, almost preventing movement down a lower area of land to the east of the site. There's a droveway that forces people past this outturned entrance, and a number of prehistoric Bronze Age barrows close to and also on top of the outer bank of this enclosure. So it must be earlier than that Bronze Age barrow that's on top of it. So
we can put up a link to that site, can't we? Because I've already looked at it with you, and that LiDAR work was incredible that the National Park did. So we'll stick up a link so people can see that.
That would be great. Fascinating. Yeah. Look, so many sites I'd like to look at, but I'd love to. That's a bit of a mystery that I'd love to get to the bottom of.
You slightly hooked me when you started talking about arrowheads earlier. And arrowheads, we did find them on Time Team, not very often. We did find some, but there is something fascinating about that process. So I think there's something really interesting about that. Now, you guys, I know, and I can tell from how bad your cameras are actually tonight, that you do an audio connection with each other, which you call the Career in Ruins. What's that about? I mean, how does that work, and when do you do it, and how can people listen?
Go on, Derek.
So Career in Ruins, as per Lawrence's hat, is a podcast about archaeology, not a traditional podcast. We're not aiming to educate anyone in the ways of particular archaeological sites or finds, but more about archaeologists themselves. Lawrence and I are really lucky in that we know a lot of people, and all of them have really interesting stories to tell. And one of the best things you can do on archaeological field work is sit around with a glass of water at the end of the day, or a glass of wine, and chat about your stories in the trenches, as it were. And we started thinking that there's so many good stories out there that people might be interested. So why don't we put together a podcast that encourages folks to tell their stories and talk about their careers in ruins, ultimately. So we did. We chucked together. We thought we'd do a few episodes, and we're two series in now. So we're going quite well.
And who have you talked to that people might know about, or what subjects did people raise? Or
we've been deliberately broad with our professionals, so and part of the reason is because we want to show how broad the profession is. But they've really varied from high-end academics such as Colin Richards, who's obviously the master of stone circles and the Neolithic in Orkney, and I mean that interview actually took place while I was working with him in the Cook Islands. So at the same time we interviewed the head of the museum from Easter Island, who was out with us, and other
Any
professionals who were
interview, I should say, that you do with Lawrence, it's obligatory. He gets the chance to mention that he went to the Cook Islands.
Have you been to the Cook Islands?
And Vanuatu, is it? Easter Island as well.
Rapa Nui and the Cook Islands, yes,
Oh.
yeah.
There's some great photographs which you'll have to put up, Lawrence. There's some incredible shots which just make you jealous. So.
Yeah, that was brilliant. And unfortunately, we didn't get to go to the Cooks this year because of COVID. But I'll let it go. We also have chatted to professionals such as people who work within Historic England, different departments there. People like Carenza we've had on the show, Miles, who I know was with you previously. Such a broad range of different specialists and experts.
Eileen Wilkes, who I think was around at the time of Time Team, she certainly helped write the rather amazing report, which you'll be able to see in connection with this piece. But her knowledge about your area, it must be amazing.
It is. Eileen's one of my dear colleagues at Bournemouth Uni. We work really closely together, and yeah, her knowledge of this area and later prehistoric Britain generally is phenomenal. We've actually just been working together on a couple of publications on Poole Harbour archaeology, which will be coming out hopefully within the year, tying up, sort of bringing together some of her really powerful work from her PhD research and beyond, and then some of my more recent stuff in the area. So we're working together now to kind of do more work and bring the research focus back to Poole Harbour, which is long overdue, I think.
And what would be the one thing that you and Eileen would still like to find? What's your Ithaca at the end of your long journey? What would you die happy if you managed to find it in that area?
Oh, I mean, you've foreshadowed this already, I think, but finding a channel-worthy ship or a vessel would be mind-blowing. I mean, that would be the thing that changes the game. I mean, there are very, very few later prehistoric wrecks, even less in this area. The Poole Harbour boat, which we mentioned earlier, is a harbour-going vessel. It wouldn't go out in the channel. So finding that cross-channel vessel from the Iron Age, particularly kind of mid to late Iron Age, when Poole Harbour is really kind of finding its feet and flourishing, would be the perfect
because you've got the Dover boat, haven't you, which is Bronze Age, I think. Which was a massive vessel, but nothing from later.
No, so we have the Dover boat, which is obviously chocked full of continental goods and British goods, and there are later boats, but the Iron Age particularly, it's a bit of a black hole in terms of maritime activity, and we know it's happening. It has to be happening. We see the products of that trade and exchange, but the mechanism is enigmatic. It'd be quite nice to find that, I think.
Good. And I've got a final question. You mentioned all your contacts. One of the things we've been asking ourselves, we've been talking to people about fantasy sites, and in our minds, I think we had the idea that the original Time Team members may mentor a group of people who would get together regionally, and we would get them to follow various projects, our future fantasy Time Team sites, which we actually might build up to and do. If we're trying to get together a team of people, what would be the best way of going about that, do you think? How many people do you think who you'd think they would be good to have on the team, and how widely across the country does it stretch?
There are fantastic professionals across the country. I think each region have their specialists. Each university will specialise in their region. But coming solely from a national park point of view, at least, I think national parks are fantastic partners within things like this, because they know they're fantastic archaeological sites, and they're desperate for people to help engage and support and learn more about their archaeologists. But also local community groups, they know their areas, they're experts. I was on Twitter just today, saw some beautiful crop marks near Old Sarum that a local Avon Valley Archaeology Society had shared and spotted. And they know what they're doing. They're the eyes and ears on the ground. They know their areas.
It's a very interesting point, Lawrence, that you could bring in the community groups with their local knowledge, bring in the local professionals with their local knowledge, and get those people to work together. When I was talking in Carenza, you know, we did the project at Dunster, which was with the National Park and the community there. Carenza's been working with a number of communities, and that sense of bringing community interest within a project like that, I think, is something, you know, I probably need to keep remembering, really.
I think I'd add another strand into the mix as well. Something you see an awful lot of on the internet, on YouTube, on TV, are archaeologists who are quite far along in their careers. They've built up a strong kind of knowledge base, a strong career foundation. But I'd love to draw in some of the early researchers, folks who are just starting out in their PhDs or even doing masters, undergraduate dissertations, because folks at that stage of their career have such a broader range of possibilities in their minds. They haven't been jaded by years of archaeological reading and sort of indoctrinated into various schools of thought. And they'll ask questions that maybe wouldn't necessarily be asked by a more senior academic or member of staff or a mentor type character. So bringing in the old and the young together would be quite fantastic, I think.
Those are really useful and interesting thoughts. I think that idea of the community, new people just beginning, archaeologists who know what they're doing locally, would be a lovely thing if we could bring that together. It's that point in the evening where I feel that a glass of wine would be a good idea. If we were together, we could share one, as we have occasionally in the past. It's very nice to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time. Good luck with careers in ruins, and I hope we can talk soon. And you know, we'll be sending you a free better camera to plug into the top, so you can have vision as well as sound. Vision's fantastic. You know, you get to see stuff as well as hear it. So I can recommend it. So, Lawrence, thank you very much.
We were really wary of seeing each other's reactions when we talk on camera. That was the main reason we didn't do it. We thought if you could see our faces, you'd know the truth.
You want to see us as well.
Yes. Anonymity is sometimes quite useful, isn't it? So thank you very much. It was lovely talking to you, and many nice memories of working with you in the past. And I hope at some point we will be doing one of your Time Team fantasy sites, either in Greece or on the National Park, or perhaps both. So good night, stay well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim.